Welcome to the Newtown Big Dreams podcast, an interview-style talk show that's your gateway to the fabulous and fascinating people who relocated to start a new life. Whether you're new to our podcast or your city, our fellow neighbors from across Canada, North America, and the entire English-speaking world share their stories of reaching new horizons and big dreams. So sit back and relax as we navigate in-depth and intimate conversations with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, executives, creatives, and anyone who can share their story about their Newtown big dreams. And now, here's your host, Luke J. Menkes.
Good morning, everybody. It's March 31st, 2021, and it's 6 a.m. here on the West Coast, and I'm with Tim Kubiak. Tim is in Wentzville, Missouri this morning, and he loves to help everyone be more successful in business and in life. Tim Kubiak brings more than 25 years of real-world experience leading and selling in every type of economy, from boom to bust. As an individual contributor, executive, or founder, he's helped companies of every size grow and thrive across countless industry segments and B2B sales models. Tim's approach has been to provide best practices that allow you to compete more, win business faster, and know when to walk away. Very important. He's got a great podcast called Bow Ties and Business. You can find that on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And of course, we'll put the links to that in the show notes. Tim, thank you for coming on the show this morning.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Luke.
You're a very interesting person who's lived an interesting life. I know you spent a lot of time traveling, living in hotels. Have you always lived in Wentzville, Missouri?
I haven't. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I grew up in Western PA in the era where steel mills were closing, and kind of as the story goes, in a town where everybody's dad worked in a mill unless they were a teacher, or my dad who had a white collar job. So It was an interesting time to grow up there, and I watched that city grow and change over the years before I started moving around. So,
How did you end up in Wentzville?
So I came here. There was a $30 million a year company that I came in to do a turnaround on and kind of transition as their industry was shifting. My wife had grown up here, and literally the conversation was, and it's for those of you that need a reference point. If you look at St. Louis, Missouri, and go due west on Highway 70, it's about 45 minutes west of St. Louis Arch, right in downtown. Okay. And I joked when we bought the house here, my plan was to stay 3 to 5 years, and I only agreed to buy in Wentzville because I just gave in. I wanted to live in other suburbs and a little closer. And my wife had gone to middle school here and lived in the town next to it. And all her cousins were here, and she thought it was going to be this amazing family experience. My joke at the time was we were 3 towns past the edge of civilization.
Right.
Yeah.
Has it changed much? Is it still like that?
No, actually, civilization's now pushed probably 2 exits past us. It's been amazing.
Wow.
And then in the 15 or 16 years that we've lived here, in this house, we've watched all the farms and fields get sold off, and the value of those farms and fields went from, I sold this many acres for $2 million to I sold half as many acres for 10 or 15 or 20 million. So there's literally new subdivisions popping up across the street. They've built high-end condos and apartments. And sometimes when I go out for a walk, I'd like take a look around. And I'm like, who's paying $2,000 a month for a high-end condo here?
Right. Amazing.
Right? Yeah.
Amazing. So I-70, if you go east, you hit St. Louis. If you go west, what's the next big city?
So it would actually be Columbia and then Kansas City. So Columbia is right about an hour west of me, and the edge of Kansas City is about 2.5 to 3 hours, depending on traffic, due west.
Okay. So you coach and train salespeople. Is that right?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, people have had to make some big adjustments since COVID-19 and travel restrictions and lockdowns and stuff. Tell us about how salespeople have had to adapt since COVID-19?
So a lot of it is, frankly, much what we're doing here, and they've had to learn to sell virtually, right? And one of the things that we've had to fight through this, other than pandemic related issues, was the misconception that you always had to be across this table face to face with somebody to truly
Right.
move the business conversation. We pivoted our entire business to virtual roughly a year ago. I hadn't been on a plane since February of last year. So it was really interesting. You went from 200 plus nights a year on the road to one. And salespeople have done the same thing. And we've seen large clients of ours have actually essentially eliminated their T&E budgets this year and may continue to. Now, they've reinvested is the interesting part. They've invested in other training, other internal resources, additional sellers. So businesses aren't just pocketing all of that money. They're investing in the sales team and their technologies as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you miss traveling? Do you miss the airplanes?
I miss the solitude of an airplane, if that makes any sense. I live my life alone in public places was kind of my joke for years. I would roll out of a taxi. I loved going through security because once I was behind security, I could, just kind of decompress. My office was an airline club for 20 years or a Marriott hotel.
Right.
And so I slept in my home on the weekends, maybe.
Right.
So that I miss those spaces. And frankly, I miss some of the people that were my friends. I got to the point where I knew the people in the clubs, not just in St. Louis, but in Dallas and in Miami and in other places. So in a way, I miss my friends. I don't miss changing time zones. I do miss London and the UK a bit, and I miss New York City a bit, but the rest of it, I'm really not longing for.
Right. So is it very different? The process of selling, the business of selling, is it very different now that we're doing it virtually versus in person?
So is it different? No, but the process itself has changed quite a bit. And one of the things we saw, and one of the first things we actually started coaching and teaching to right as the pandemic hit, is the buying process itself changed. Signatory authority, and I'll give you an example. There was a large public company. People were buying essentially run rate type of things that were $10,000, $50,000, whatever, but they were things the business consumed and used, non-production materials, right? Support contracts, things like that, things they had to have. And a year ago, we saw that pivot. So not just the divisional CFO was signing off, but we were watching corporate CFOs have to sign off on transactions for, $100 million plus kind of companies that they normally wouldn't have looked at. It would have come up in a line item review somewhere, and it would have just been buried in because it was the cost of doing business. That has changed, and who you have to call on had largely changed. And one of my favorite stories is I had a company I was calling on going, hey guys, the whole world has shifted and the buying process has changed and da-da-da-da-da-da. And they were very nice, but they told me, you know what? We've had these same accounts for 20 years. They keep the lights on. They're never going to change, right? As a matter of fact, we got a $10 million order coming in. About 3 weeks later, I got a phone call. They didn't get the $10 million order. It went to a competitor they didn't know about, and they'd lost their 20-year contact.
Yeah.
At which point I said, my price is going up. I'm very busy right now, but I'm happy to help.
Very interesting. So, top performers, they hire sales coaches. You know this. I know this. A lot of people think, especially poor performers, think that you get a coach if you have a problem, but it's actually the reverse. The top performers are the ones that need a coach. Explain to our listeners why that is.
There's the old saying, it's lonely at the top, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at that, and I'll use some sports analogies. If you look at Tom Brady, in football, he has a coach. You look at the greatest goaltenders in hockey, they all have goaltender coaches. And that's the thing people don't see. And it actually really goes to the executive level, and it goes in movies and entertainment. So it's easy to pick a celebrity and say, oh, so-and-so had a voice coach, or they had a personal trainer, or they had this and they had that. Top performing salespeople sometimes are so driven that they just need outside perspective. And one of the things I valued most when I was an executive before I got into coaching was the fact that I had somebody who would call me on my BS.
I see.
I couldn't use corporate speak. I could, they would tell me I had no work-life balance, and I'm pretty transparent. I totally tanked my personal world. All I did was work. I had no balance, and I had coaches there telling me, dude, you're going to burn out. You're not, I do pre-pandemic. I did yoga when I was home on weekends, right? They're like, you're not going to yoga. You're working 18 hours a day. It's not sustainable. And by the way, you're not going to really take over the world. You need to be more reasonable. And sometimes that's why you need a coach. Other times it's just strategy. So for example, in a coaching call yesterday, high 6 figures, low 7 figures earner is going after 10 new accounts. And one of the things he hadn't done was basic blocking and tackling, just because he was so focused on the target, he hadn't stopped to think, hey, I know 500 people really well that I do business with. I haven't asked any of them if they can help me get in here.
Wow.
Right. And so, he wins one deal, pays for me for a year. So it's great.
Yeah. So it's a blind spot that you helped him to recognize.
Yep, exactly. And different coaches have different philosophies, but mine is really about large deals.
I see. So tell us a bit about your philosophy. So it's focusing on large deals. Makes sense.
So you talked about, low performers. And so one of the things we do is, a lot of times when I'm working with a business owner and it's a corporate sponsored thing or a medium sized or small business sponsored thing, they always want to bring you the C players, right? Mm-hmm. But they want to bring you the people that aren't making their number, and they're trying to get them there. And look, I'm not saying those are bad people, but I literally won't take that contract.
Right.
My entire approach is, give me your A players. We'll run it as a proof of concept. If you have 200 sellers, give me your top 10. Let me work with your top 10. We'll get 20% more out of them. And then we'll step it down, right? And we'll build groups, and we'll eventually maybe go even to the B plus, right? So you got the folks on the honor roll or the Hall of Famers, and then you have the people that are just good, solid performers, and we'll get them up and do it in stages. And the C players, I have a term. I say I'm mercenary sales management. If you want me to come and work through your C players, it's a whole different pay grade. I will come in and I will help weed and feed, but that's an ugly business, and I really don't like to do it.
Right. So is that the reason why so many newly hired salespeople struggle or they fail, because you top guys like you won't talk to them?
No, actually it's not. It's because companies don't teach them what they need to know. Right. I use an American football analogy, and this is how you train new salespeople, right? Think of the 2-minute drill at the end of a football game, right?
Yeah.
So in the 2-minute drill, you have everything scripted. If you hire a new salesperson that's never sold before, out of those 2 minutes, you spend the first minute saying, here's how you log into everything. Then you spend 15 seconds telling them, here's our HR policies. Here's 15 seconds on why we're great. Here's the lunchroom. And the last 5 seconds is, oh, by the way, we sell stuff.
Right.
And if you look, a lot of the great old companies, Bell Canada was one, right? IBM in the United States, AT&T in the United States, ADP still does this, and it has an amazing program. They have a formal onboard program. British Telecom's another one, where they will bring you in and they will they're not expecting you to go make calls day one. They're investing in you, in your product knowledge, in your selling skills, in your general business acumen. And that's why a lot of salespeople fail, especially at the new level. The other thing is, we rely too much on technology. Nowadays, everybody wants to make everything AI. And ironically, I work with the founder of an AI company, so they love when I say this. But you can't do everything with AI. I understand the whole world thinks you can turn it into Google and Facebook advertising. But complex, multi-million-dollar, in many cases, multinational deals, you can't use AI to close those. You can't work through the nuances. So you have to give people skills. And entry-level people, small business owners, you're spending their money, right? So the emotional ties, you just can't push with some AI script.
Right. No, I believe it. So can you tell us a little bit about what separates a top salesperson from an average or below average salesperson? Like, what makes those A-plus players A-plus?
So I'll tell you what they're not, because first there's the stereotype, right? Everybody thinks the A players are the glad-handing type A, drinks and golf type of salesperson. And there are some of those. But the vast majority of A players are the ugly ducklings. They're the people that no one thinks is going to be a top performer, right? And so it's the person who shows up early, who figures out what their customers want, who follows up and gets back to them, who has a plan and recognizes when the plan doesn't work and adjusts. They're the people that when business is good are trying to figure out how to keep that business good and looking at what else do they sell into their accounts, where else should they be selling, who else should they be talking to, and they're always challenging and learning and growing themselves. That's what makes a great salesperson. Everything else is a soft skill, but that kind of drive and that kind of focus, you really have to look at it as running your own business.
Right. Now, some people are great salespeople, but they're not really great sales leaders. What can sales leaders do to create high-performing organizations?
So I believe the first thing you have to do is be transparent with the objectives. Right.
Okay.
And so one of the things you've seen companies do in the last 10 years or so is they stack the numbers, right?
Okay.
And I'll give you an example. I went into a place where it was post-acquisition. I had to grow and build the team. And by the way, the salespeople were some of the best compensated salespeople I'd ever seen. And the first thing they wanted me to do was tear down the comp plan and just make them make a quarter of the money because they were making too much for the segment they were in, right? The second thing they wanted me to do was jack the number, right? So the industry, I love the story. If the industry was growing 8%, everybody, and you're in the leading market position, everybody comes in and says, I need to beat that 8%. 8.25, 8.5, 8.75, maybe. But inevitably what you have is you have a board that says, well, we need to get it to 9.5. So the CEO to get to his number tells everybody they have to get to 10.5. And the sales, by the time it gets to the sales VPs and the sales directors, they're looking for 15% growth on an industry that's growing 8%.
Okay.
And it's not realistic. You have to be realistic when you set your targets. That I've seen a lot of things, and I've seen some other podcasts where they talk about, less than 56% of people are hitting their sales numbers in corporate sales gigs now. Do you know why? Because they're stacking the numbers so big that when they do 75%, man, is that amazing. And it's just going to burn people out, and it's going to cost you good talent.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, I mean, it seems pretty simple though, right? Like you just have more and more salespeople and then you duplicate your results. Is that the best way to grow? Just keep adding more?
Yeah, but you have to add the right people. You have to have the right plan. Okay. So there's some Silicon Valley companies that they had the model where they would hire somebody, and we'll say in Raleigh, North Carolina. Okay. And so when that territory got to X million a year, and say 3 to keep the math simple, what they did is they then split the territory the following year. They put a second person in and said, okay, now it's $1.5 million. Next year, we need the territory to be 2 million, but we've got 2 of you, right? And in this case, they did take good care of that first person, right? Second person came in, and it was to accelerate the growth. If you have a plan and the market can bear it, that will work. The other thing people do is they throw bodies at problems. And you talk about salespeople we talked about them not being trained. You talked about newer salespeople failing. They just want to throw bodies at problems. And one of the things that we work with is, what's your platform? I don't care what it is, by the way. Your CRM, your sales methodology, it can be any of the major ones. Are you using it? Are you implementing it consistently? And one of the things I do is I actually tell people, okay, you spent $1 million on whatever. I'll come in and we'll coach inside of that, so you help recognize that value. But you have to do that as you hire people too. You can't just put people in. The other piece is, and one of my clients was telling me they're getting 500 warm leads a month, but they're not closing any of them. Think about that.
How does that happen?
That was my exact question. So my assumption and this is an ongoing conversation, is they've got the wrong customer avatar, right? To use a marketing term. So they're drawing people in as warm leads, and knowing that you're in the property business, they're drawing people in trying to sell them $1 million properties when they're in the $500,000 price range, right?
I see.
They're drawing people in that aren't really qualified leads for them. And you're always going to have some, but they've got to look at that. And the marketing spend's incredible. And the marketing VP at this client is like, no, it's great. We've got all these leads. You guys, suck. And we're like, well, we might suck, but we can't suck 0 for 500 for 3 months in a row. Nobody's that bad.
Right. You mentioned CRMs. Why do you think some salespeople don't use them as much as they should or as well as they should? Is it just like they feel like it's office work and they want to get out there on the road and talk to people? Or I see a lot of resistance people using the CRM.
So the first thing is often when they're rolled out not well. And it's not an indictment of the CRM. It's an indictment of how the company's deployed it. Okay. So what they do is they create processes that don't fit. So we'll say that, like, for example, I've deployed Salesforce.com at 3 different companies, right? Mm-hmm. And the first one I will tell you, and it was a long time ago, and Salesforce was still a young company then, it was in the early 2000s, but I blew the deployment. I didn't know what I needed. I'd never done one before. So I went with what was recommended. I hired a partner on a budget, essentially, to get it put in because I'd already paid for the subscription, and it didn't really match my sales process. So issue 1 is it's wrong. Issue 2 is it's rolled out as a magic 8-ball and a compliance tool, right? So if you put everything in, it goes back to them trying to turn everything into Google and Facebook advertising. If you put it in, it should follow this logical process, and when it gets here, it should close.
Okay.
And the truth is you might have 100 contacts in there, but maybe 4 matter to your deal. Are you really working those 4? Do you really have a plan to work the 4? Not the CRM's fault, right? And it goes back to why sales leaders, don't have more high performing teams. It's because they're so caught up in looking at the metrics and, we did 4,000 calls this week and we had 22 of this type of call and 40 of this type of call. And we project this and that, and we don't know why this went dark. Instead of actually being in the deals with the reps and helping them grow.
Yeah, sure. So we talked about how the sales process has changed since COVID-19. How has the buying process changed? Are people doing different things now? I mean, of course, we're having a lot of meetings over Zoom. We're doing things virtually, but has the process for buying changed a lot?
So it has. So, I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, you're seeing CFOs making decisions, right? I've seen CFOs in public sector businesses and corporations and in small businesses overrule the CEO. Nope, we're not going to spend the money. We're going to hold the cash. We're going to do this. The other thing we're seeing is we're actually seeing people sweat assets. And I work a lot around the tech space. So I work with telecoms and data center people and security people. Security's an interesting space because the threats are always evolving, so you can't really stay with the status quo. But if you're the plumbing in a network, if you're the route switch connectivity piece, they're going to sweat you out a little longer. They're going to hold their assets. They're going to defer their buying cycles. We've seen that. I've seen the same thing in chemical business. The one thing that's actually impacting things as much as anything, if you're dealing with imports from Asia, and by the way, just about everything's made in Asia. You can't get a container. You can't get one to Vancouver. You can't get one to California, right? It is taking forever. So things that used to take 4 to 6 week lead time to get in, you're now projecting out 12, 18, 24 plus weeks. It's true in furniture, true in technology. You just can't get the containers.
Is there any hope that that's going to get better? Is any manufacturing moving to the States, or is it just something we got to deal with? So
I think we should learn a lesson. Whether we have is a whole different issue, right? The States are notoriously cheap but they're not
Okay.
cheaper than Asia. They're not cheaper than Latin America, right? So if you look at labor costs, and I'll use the EU as an example, your labor costs, your social benefits, and Canada's got a good example too, right? There are some things included in doing business in Canada that aren't included in US.
Right.
So the US tends to skirt those costs, but they're always looking to save money.
Yeah.
If the pandemic's taught us anything, it's taught that you have to have diverse supply chains. Now, diverse supply chains should be certainly within your own nation if you have the resources to some extent, and then you use a hedge. It's like having two cell phone carriers. If I don't have a signal on this one and I have a signal on this one, that's what I use. And manufacturing should go that way. The other thing we've seen is we have seen people taking more inventory positions. So I haven't seen manufacturing shift yet, but I've seen them taking on additional warehouse space. We've seen people pre-buy and hedge to not run as tight of an inventory. So carrying costs are up.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of like furniture for an example. We just ordered a new dining room table set. I'm guessing it came from Asia because it took like 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
We would have gladly paid an extra 10, 15, 20% more to get it tomorrow instead of waiting 3 months. So, I mean, you think there's an incentive there to at least move some manufacturing over here to North America, but.
Yeah. So if you look at furniture specifically, like, you know, this is not a political statement. It is a business statement. China has absolutely targeted the furniture industry in North Carolina, right? Even the moderately priced stuff, not just the high-end solid wood stuff. They've really gone after aggressively. IKEA, if we want to pick on some Europeans, have done the same thing, and they've changed that, right? To move that back, I think you've lost generations of talent. You know, I'll use St. Louis as an example. In Pittsburgh, I could find a good cobbler, right, on every street corner or every third block at least, right, to resole my shoes. In St. Louis, I have to drive 30 miles to find one because it's become disposable, right? It wasn't built on that same thing. And I think you've lost that same kind of talent, you know, in other industries. And furniture is certainly one of them. You know, I think a lot of manufacturing, we've seen that.
Right. So when it comes to company culture, can that be a competitive advantage?
It can be, both from a customer experience perspective, as well as from an employee recruitment and retainment. If you look, more and more people are choosing on culture, right? Am I a fit? And culture can mean a number of things. It can mean how they work, how they allow you to work. We talked about being virtual, right? There's a great debate. Buddy of mine's CEO of a company that sells on-premise video. Everything he's putting out is you got to get your people back in the office. Love you, Neil, but it's true, right? Where the people that sell technologies and enable remote workers on the other side of the fence are going, nobody ever wants to come back. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But people are going to make decisions on that. You know, myself as an example, I spent 14 days, full days in hours a year connecting back to St. Louis when I traveled. Not my flight to my final destination, just the connection times. Okay.
Right.
Sitting in an airport and trying to get on that next flight. I have no desire to go back to that. If I ever have to travel again, I will literally sell the house and go. I will go to a hub city, and that'll be great. I
see. Yeah. Well, that's great. That's been super informative. Tell us about your website and the kind of services you offer and how people can find you.
Sure. So my website is my name. So timkubiak.com. And I do a number of things. You referenced in the beginning, I do a podcast. My podcast is focused on founders, entrepreneurs, and sales professionals. Occasionally you get some authors and some other folks in there, but I try to mix it up and keep it interesting. So if you're in sales, it's a resource for you.
How did you come up with the name? Sorry to interrupt. How did you come up with the name?
My oldest daughter, who is 20, I guess she's 27 now. She was 26 at the time. Yeah. I wear a bow tie every Tuesday. And it started as I went to dinner in New York City. I didn't know how to tie a bow tie. I went to a place called the Tie Bar, said, I'll buy a bunch of ties if you teach me to tie one. Wore one to dinner, and my wife made fun of me. Right? I sent a selfie with some of my guys. And so it became a joke. because at first she didn't dig the bow ties. So when my daughter was looking for names, she just came up with bow ties in business. And the whole push was just to get me out of my comfort zone and talk to new people. So
good stuff. Okay. So that's your website, timkubiak.com. And thanks for your time this morning. It's been great.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Newtown Big Dreams podcast with your host, Luke Menkes, and his authentic guests. And we love our listeners and hope you subscribe now to learn more about the amazing journeys of our incredible guests who relocated to find a new town, big dreams. And remember, make your dreams big.